Hey guys, I want to create a really quick basic scene management video. I've had some requests talking about making some scene changes based on some game states, like if your player falls off or dies, or easily loading up the next scene when we've collected a number of collectibles or power-ups or things like that. And in these brackets, it could be any sort of condition that you want. When that condition is met, then you want to load the next possible scene. And then I'm going to talk really quickly about possible timing, like not immediately loading the scene, but maybe waiting 1 or 2 seconds so that you can play a nice animation of your character dying, or when you reach a certain point in your game, like a landmark or collecting that last collectible, then you want to load that next scene. We'll talk about that last. I have a really basic example scene where our Mario is standing on this platform and it is shooting some projectiles, and we're keeping track of how many asteroids we destroy with these projectiles. And maybe we want to have a situation that once we've hit or destroyed 3 of these guys, then we want to load the next scene. And then I want to show if we want to reload the same scene. Let's say Mario falls off, we want to be able to reload that scene. So how do we make that all happen? Let's quickly talk about our Mario character, and maybe if he falls off, it's really common to have an object that has a collider with a boundary, outlining a boundary area, and if Mario falls off, then we know that if it hits a certain object with a tag, we can call our scene management. So let me first show you where I have my scene management scripts. Typically, I have an object that maybe I call it manager, and I have some scripts that are doing some important jobs. One is a UI manager that displays the number of collectibles that we have, and then we have one that's keeping track of how many collectibles we've actually gotten. I like to keep those things separate. And then we have a scene controller, and that's where the functionality of being able to load and unload these scenes comes from. So this scene controller script is has a few really important aspects to it. First of all, we always want to be able to we should be writing using Unity Engine .scene management, and that unlocks the scene loading namespace. Secondly, we want to make sure that we don't ever call our class's scene manager, because this is actually namespace that Unity uses, and if we do that, then we'll get an ambiguity error. So this is why I'm calling mine scene controller. You can capitalize yours in a more creative way to try to avoid using capital S, capital M scene manager if you want. And so this really basic script, I have a link to it at the bottom of this video, has a few functionalities to it. One of them, which is keeping track of which is the index of our current scene. Unity can load different scenes based on the build index or the scene name. And if you don't know what the build index is, we always want to be able to put in the scenes that we possibly will be loading in our game, and they all go into this window here. So how do I get there? I go to File, Build Settings, and if your game has 3 scenes or levels to it, you want to make sure that you pull all 3 of those in there, and most likely in the order that you want them to appear. So I have a main menu scene and then some other scenes after that. The one I'm working in currently is week 6 UI animations and movement, and I put that one there. So once the scene loads, you'll notice that my current scene index will jump to 1, because what happens when this scene loads is that I'm accessing the scene manager class from Unity and getting the active scene right when we start, and I'm asking it to return the build index rather than the scene name. Build index refers to the 0, 1, 2, 3 in the build settings that I just showed you. So if I'm talking about index, then it refers to these numbers here, and I can call based on the index which scene I want to load. So here I'm getting a number returned when this object enters the scene or when the scene loads, and that lets me know what current scene it is. And with that information, I'm able to reload that same scene if I want to, or go to the next one, because since it's an index, I can add a number 1 or add a value of 1 to tell it to load the next scene. Here's some basic public methods that I've written here, and these can be accessed by other scripts if I want to load appropriate scenes if I want. And so I have one that's called load scene with a lowercase ls, a lowercase l scene, and I can feed it the index that I want to load. And it's accessing the scene manager dot load scene method. If you want to be calling a specific scene, then you would feed it something like this. And if you called this here, it would load the 11th scene in your game, or the 10th index in your game. Let me just go back here. And then if you want to be able to call a scene by its name, maybe you have really simple names like level 1, level 2, then you can write those in here if you want to. Next thing that I use is this method that I call load next scene, and basically I take that active or current scene index and I add 1 to it, and that, when I call this, just adds a single value. Like I said, the one that I'm loading, that I'm running right here, if I were to call the next scene, it would load the index 2 scene, because this is my current one. If I add 1 to it, then it's going to load my second or third scene. And then I have this reload scene. And basically, if Mario falls off my mushroom, I want to be able to say, oh, maybe Mario died or fell in a pit, and I want to load the same scene that we're currently on, which is why it's important to be able to access which index is our current scene. Lastly, it might be interesting to delay your load a certain amount of time, and so I have this delayed next load and a delayed reload, and I have a parameter that we can take in, which is going to use the invoke method, and that basically is a Unity function where we can say that we want to call a function that we have in this script or another script, and we'll call it by the name that we want to load. In this case, we have this load next scene. We're telling it to call this function, but wait 2 seconds before calling it. So this gives us time to possibly play a little animation, or make it so that the user can see that we've crossed that finish line before immediately calling that next scene. So that's giving some opportunity to have some visual feedback before we move on. Cool. So let's look at what I have here. I have this thing that I've called fall boundary, and I have a box collider 2D created here, and I've given it a tag of fall boundary here. And on my Mario character, I have this simple script called character fall, and all it does is finds my scene controller, which is living on my manager, and I'm using this find object of type method that's looking for this instance in the scene. This is only helpful using this find object of type if there's only one instance. Otherwise, you need to use a variation of it where it's going to return more than one instance. But since I know that I'm only using one scene controller, this way is really handy. And so it returns the reference to the instance of my scene controller, and then I can call the scene controller in my collision function here. So I have some collision logic here that says that if I bump into an object with a collider that's on a game object with a tag of fall boundary, then I want to reload the same scene. And to make that happen, I'll take the reference of my scene controller, and then I will call on the reload scene method. This method is the one that just simply reloads the scene immediately, and let's see what that looks like. So Mario fell off, and we immediately reload the scene. Let me just adjust this fall boundary so that Mario can look like he's falling off the screen completely before we reload the scene. There we go. Cool. And just to show you the other version of this, this is the one where we reload immediately. If I comment this out, I'll call on that delayed version that I had. I have this delayed reload, and that's basically invoking that same method that we had here, but we're just telling it to wait 2 seconds. So I would call it SceneController. I can't type. SceneController dot delayed reload, and I'll tell it to wait a certain amount of time. Oh, did I write this weird? Yeah, I probably did. I should have this value here because I have a magic number of 2 seconds. Let's write in that delay parameter here for both of them. So it's gonna take the number that I feed it in my fall method, and I'm saying, hey, wait 1 second. It's going to take that 1 second and stick it here. It'll wait 1 second and then reload the scene. So let's try it now. There we go. So it waited 1 second and reloaded. Cool. So we know that that works. If our Mario falls off the scene, falls in a pit or something, then we want to reload that same one, and we're using that current index to recall that same scene. So let's say that we want to say that if Mario destroys 3 of these asteroids, you notice that these numbers are ticking, then we want to load the next scene. So how do we make that happen? Before we put that Mario fall or character fall on my character here, most likely what I would do is, if I'm going to keep track of how many asteroids I destroy, I'll probably do the logic in that same script. So right now I have the script that's keeping track of how many collectibles I have, and this method gets called every time a asteroid gets destroyed, and I'm keeping track of it with this integer called num collectibles. In your game that already exists, it's probably in somewhere else, but I normally do this check here, and I might say that if our num collectibles is greater than a certain value. Again, you may not use a magic number here. You might likely have maybe a public or serialized field integer that says collectible goal, and this can be an arbitrary number that you decide. If our number is equal to or greater than the collectible goal, then we want to load the next scene. So this is where we're going to say load the next scene. But like we did for the other one, we want to be able to access that scene controller. So we need to create a reference variable. And we'll say scene controller, lowercase s scene controller, and then on start, we are going to find that reference to the controller, and we will say find object of type capital S scene controller, the name of the class or the instance. Now that we have that instance, we'll be able to call on this, and we'll load the next scene. So wherever you are increasing the value of your collectibles, you might want to do a little check here. You could just pull this thing out if you want to and create a method of maybe something like check goals and put that information there, and keep it nice and clean here. Check goals. Let's check this or try it out. Oh, we didn't set the collectible goal. Let's say we set it to 2. There we go. So that loaded week 7. That was this following scene. Cool. I hope this helps. Let's look at it really fast one more time just to review. We had the situation where wherever you are increasing your collectible goal, write some functionality where you are checking for the the number of things to happen, that game state that you want to achieve, and if it's met, then access the reference to our scene controller and load that next scene. Hope this helps. I hope you have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.